The title of this session is Collaborative and Iterative UX Curriculum Development. And this is a narrative really about curriculum that I developed because I saw it sort of happening at other universities, and I wanted to design curriculum that worked right at the university that I was at. And I'm hoping that you all will participate in some chat questions, because I'd love to learn your insights and see sort of ways that I can improve. So please, I'd love it. I'd love if there was a lively chat. Do ask questions, do interject comments, and so we'll get started. So the format for this session is I'll start by doing just a little introduction about myself, and I'll talk a little bit about kind of how I got to where I am, and then we'll get into talking about the design of this UX curriculum. So the first part is the design decisions that went into the curriculum. The second part is the way that we've worked with industry professionals to help guide the curriculum decisions. The third is going to be sort of a showcase of experiential learning activities that students have done. And then the fourth part is an exploration of the way that UX curriculum can extend beyond just the classroom or beyond just the major where UX lives, because it sort of lives in different places depending on where you are. So my name is Jerry. I'm an associate professor, and I'm also the chair of the computer science department at Judson University. And I've been here a year. I was at Bowling Green State University for 9 years before this, and this is where the majority of the work that I'm talking about today happened. These are different schools in terms of their size and their culture, but this UX curriculum is something I developed at BGSU and have carried over to Judson. And so you'll see in these slides, I'm going to paste the questions that I'm hoping you'll answer in the chat. They also appear at the bottom of most of the slides. So it says chat question, and the question is, what are some of the biggest gaps you see between what universities teach in their UX curricula and the skills and knowledge that are actually required in industry? So I guess what I'm asking is, if you're in the industry and you're seeing new graduates come in, what do they not know? What do you wish they knew? So I'll give you a couple of minutes to think about that, and I'll continue telling you about the UX curriculum. So first of all, I'm at, as I said, Judson University, which is just outside of Chicago. And this is a small liberal arts school with a very sort of tight-knit community. I'll tell you a little bit about the research that I do. There's 4 main projects that I work on. One is, so I should, as I mentioned, I'm a computer scientist. And so these are very sort of computer science focused, but I would say with a lean heavily towards human-computer interaction and user experience. So these 4 projects are my main focus. The first one is sign language synthesis. My team, my fellow researchers, are working on creating a system that takes a speech input and generates animations of American Sign Language using a 3D avatar. The second one is a mobile app called Easel that supports students doing micro reflections as they participate in experiential learning. The third one, I study the way that students develop computational thinking when they engage in STEAM activities. And so STEAM is, you've probably heard of STEM before. So STEAM is STEM with the A standing for art. So it's science, technology, engineering, art, and mathematics. To give you a little insight into the project, we've developed a curriculum where students create interactive electronic art projects. So these are sculptures that have motors built in and lights and sensors and things like that. And what we've found is evidence of computational thinking because they have to learn to code to make these things work. And it reduces the barrier for learning. So we're finding students in middle school and high school who were very apprehensive to learn code are actually embracing it because they're in the context of art making. And then the fourth project is learner experience design, which seems like it's named very closely to user experience design. I'll talk about this more later in the session. Learner experience design is applying UX principles to curricular design. Okay, so then let's look back at the chat. So the question I asked was, what are some of the biggest gaps that you see between what universities teach? And Miles sent a reply, so I'm going to read it and then respond to it. So he says, I'd love to see more emphasis on teaching how to tailor methods and tactics to the needs of the project, as opposed to teaching to one particular singular set of deliverables or sequence of methods. Yeah, that's interesting, Miles, because that's always a challenge is trying to come up with real world projects. And instead of saying like, well, now we're going to learn about journey maps, and now we're going to learn about empathy diagrams, those aren't always appropriate for every project. So I think that's kind of what you're getting at. Am I right? Yeah, I would agree. And I think it's challenging. And so to share my perspective, I went straight through undergrad, master's degree, PhD, and then started teaching at a university. And I've kept professional like friendships and worked on some projects with UX professionals. This is how I know what I know about UX, but I wouldn't consider myself a UX professional because I'm not in the industry. So a challenge for teachers is keeping up with the way things work in the industry, which is a good segue. When I put together this curriculum, I, of course, as any teacher would, looked for textbooks. And there are some out there. These four I found particularly good, but they are, I think they align pretty closely with what you described, Miles. They sort of are very formulaic. This is how you do UX. And as you know, that's not very realistic, right? So, but nevertheless, this is where I started, was with these four books. And so, does anybody love any of these books? I particularly love Don't Make Me Think. I think that's one of the greatest books for UX designers. So I started there and then developed course objectives. And so I know that it's terrible form to put this many words on the screen. I know that. But I wanted to sort of share with you that I started, I think, in the right place. The main focus was on doing the things that those textbooks listed out. So things like persona development, task description, use cases, journey maps, documentation. These were all things that I wanted to make sure that students knew. So let's move on to the next chat question. I'm hoping you all will answer this. It says, when you were learning UX, what were the most valuable learning experiences? So if you can think back to when you were learning to do your job, what were the really valuable learning experiences? And while you all think of answers to that, I will tell you a little bit about the curriculum that we did the first year, and I'll talk about how it evolved. Okay, so the first project is a mid-fi mobile app prototype. So sometimes the first day of class, we just go over the syllabus. I don't do that. I think you need to get working as soon as you start. And so if you've used the app called Marvel app, It's really awesome. So it's awesome because it has a very shallow learning curve. What I have students do in 1 3-hour session, the first class session, is come up with an app concept, come up with a screen design for it, create the prototype by drawing screens on paper, and enter it into Marvel app, which I'll show you a little demo of that. If I can press play here.
Good.
And hopefully you all can see the video stream. But basically, Marvel app lets you take photos of the screens that you prototyped by hand, and then you can draw hotspots and build in interaction. And so anybody can learn this. And so this requires no code and no previous experience. Anyone can learn it. So they can go from concept to designing a prototype and putting it into an app, and then actually doing a very basic task analysis user test with other members in the classroom, all in a 3-hour session. So that kicks off the semester is that class session. Then we move into an exercise that's focused on human-centered design. And so in this one, students are put into groups, and one of the students is identified as the user, and the rest of them are designers. The first part is an interview where the designers ask the user about the way that they like to travel. So they ask them questions about where they like to go, what was their favorite trip they've ever been on, what activities do they like to do, how long do they spend on a trip, what mode of transport do they prefer, questions like that. And so without telling them that they're gaining empathy, they're gaining empathy. They're basically like building a little persona about the way this person travels. After they've done this interview, I have them work together, both designers and user, to create a prototype of the perfect travel bag. And this is a really great exercise. This is, again, something that we do in just one class session. And they draw a sketch of this perfect travel bag and then list out all of the features of it. And what we see is, if the user really likes beach vacations, then the bag will have like a compartment to hold the towel and a cooler built in so that they can keep cold drinks and a place to keep their beach umbrella. If they're into like a nomadic travel experience, oftentimes the students will build in like a charging dock for all of their electronics and a camera storage space. And it's built into a backpack format as opposed to an over the arm format. So I think you get the idea that, or I should say you get the idea, but also they get the idea that design is a very individualized thing and that creative ideas come from gaining empathy. The next assignment, we move into creating empathy diagrams and journey maps. Of course, this is something that is in a lot of your workflows, I'm sure. The way that this assignment plays out is that we watch videos of someone interviewing someone, and then they use markers and Post-its and craft paper to draw out hand-drawn empathy diagrams and journey maps, and then they move on to using their computers to sort of make higher fidelity versions that are more deliverable. Okay. There's an assignment called Observation, Engagement, and Immersion. And this is kind of a classic one that I've learned from design thinking workshops where the students go to a busy place, whether it's a train station, a restaurant, a library, a gym, and they go there with the intention of first spending 15 minutes just observing and taking notes of what they see. Then they spend 15 minutes talking with people and asking them questions about their experience there. And then the last 10 minutes or so, they spend doing the activity. So if they're at the gym, then they actually get on a machine and they and they do the exercise. If they're at the library, then they go and they try to find a book that they're interested in. And then they write up a report on this experience. The next one focuses on user experience interviews. So for this exercise, they conduct interviews and record them on video. So it's groups of about 3 students interviewing people. And the approach here is that I don't give them any instruction on how to conduct interviews. They learn as they go. So recording the interviews and doing the interviews is a learning experience unto its own. But the real learning happens when I ask them to write a guide for making empathy videos. I ask them to write up a sort of step-by-step or a list of tips for someone who's going to conduct interviews. The reflection on the experience is where they actually do most of their learning. So you all probably can't see this, but I can highlight some things that have popped out in these. So this group of students identified a couple of different, they sort of broke it out into sections. The planning section, they say, physically write out your questions, because what they found was if they had their questions on their cell phone, that it sort of created a barrier. You know, you don't like it when somebody checks their phone when they're talking to you. And so if even though they're reading from their notes app, people sort of were turned off by the fact that they were looking at their phone. And it worked out much better if they printed it out on a sheet of paper. Another observation was, while you're conducting the interviews, try to get people to laugh. And they listed some things that they said that got people to laugh, because they were approaching people in a public space and asking them, like, can I do an interview with you? And so they listed out some things like, we're not stalking you, I promise. Like, that made people laugh. Or, we don't like talking to strangers either. Little things. So all of these things that they identified as being important for people conducting interviews, these are the things that a textbook would say about how to conduct interviews. Things like prompt them further if they give you a short answer. Like, that's what follow-up questions are all about. And then they also listed out some tips for like technical tips for recording, because they were just using their cell phones to record. For instance, one group found that if you recorded audio on one phone and video on another, you could put the microphone closer to people. It ended up with higher fidelity. They sort of figured out that you shouldn't put the camera directly in their face. You should put it away from them. Things like that. Okay. And then the last project is called a mobile app to improve job performance. And this is really a sort of soup to nuts exercise that takes a couple of weeks, where they're combining all the things that they learned. So they start by doing an interview with a professional. And the idea is to try to suss out how you could help make their lives easier, how to make them better at their job through a mobile app, because I want them to learn Figma, right? So they first record a video with a professional. Here, Lindsay's interviewing a police officer on the campus. They produce empathy artifacts, which include the video interview, an empathy diagram, and a journey map. They do ideation to come up with a solution. They create a prototype for it, first on paper, then they make it in Figma, and that's their project for the course. Okay, so let's look back at the chat. I'm seeing not so much activity in the chat. Well, if you'd like to answer this question now, you have your chance. When you were learning UX, what were the most valuable learning experiences? So I'd love your insights if you'd like to share. And while you're thinking of those, I'm going to move on to talk about the UX professionals that that were really instrumental in building out the curriculum. Oh, before I move on, I see Miles says, love hearing about those assignments. Oh, thank you very much. Definitely remember getting pushed out of my comfort zone when it came to research recruitment. Recruitment was a valuable experience. Yeah, it totally is just approaching strangers it's weird. It's hard to get used to. Bridging that gap from friends, family, classmate interviews to strangers and trying to figure out the right strangers to talk to and how to find them. It's funny you say that, Miles. That's actually in some of their guides, is about how to choose the right people to talk to. Like, walk up and smile, and if they smile back, then say, excuse me. They also found that instead of just saying, can I interview you? They say, excuse me, I'm a student and I'm working on a project. Could you help me? And then people are very sympathetic when they do that. Okay, so let's, this is, I think, a great group of slides to share, because it recognizes the UX professionals that that were really instrumental in creating the curriculum. And while we're going through this section, maybe you can answer this question too, and I'll drop it in the chat just so you make sure you've got it. So the question is, what are some common misconceptions that students have about UX design, and how can universities address these misconceptions? So even if you just identify misconceptions, that would be a great talking point. Okay, so here are some folks that were very generous with their time to come in and do either workshops or guest lectures or lead an activity. So Daniva Goins is a UX designer for VMware, and she led a workshop that focused on ethics, diversity, and inclusion by UX design. This was really terrific for our students, especially students of color, to see a Black woman who has risen up the ranks professionally. Also, being in tech, she was a great inspiration, and really had a great story, and was a terrific workshop leader as well. Warren Berger, who is the author of A More Beautiful Question, was on our campus because we used that book as our common read for everybody at the university. And he led a workshop on design thinking and creative ideation. This was terrific because if you've read this book, or if you'd like to read this book, I can tell you that it's terrific. It's really about how questions are usually more important than answers. And asking the right questions can lead to innovation. Jean Poor is the Chief Information Officer for Life Formations, which is a company that makes animatronics for Disney. And he has just a really great approach to creativity. And so he was really talking about product creation, entrepreneurial innovation, and he talked about how he helped to build this company up in such a niche space. Keith Instone actually has been really supportive throughout this whole process. He's from Toledo. He's a research analyst at Stratascale. And he gave the students a talk about the different career paths that you can take in UX, which was really, really valuable. Ray Dennison is the Director of Interaction Design at Crown Equipment. And funny enough, I met him at a UX conference. It wasn't Convey UX. It was one called Midwest UX. And I think it was in Cincinnati, I think. I happened to strike up a conversation with him. I told him I was from this university, and he said, yeah, I'm from Crown Equipment. And I said, like the forklifts? And he was like, you have no idea how much UX work has to go into a robotic factory or robotic warehouse. His team works on the interface for forklifts and different inventory equipment. And this was so eye-opening because I think when you think about a career in UX, you think like, oh, I'm going to work on web or mobile, but it's in so many other industries. And this really shined a light on that. My good friend Jorge Toro, who's an HCI engineer at Morse Corp out of Boston. They work for the government to do contracts. And he gave a talk about how he forged his career path, his PhDs in computer science, and then he transitioned from doing software engineering into HCI and UX. Okay, great. So let's look back to the chat and see if we have any additional answers about the misconceptions. So if you can think of any misconceptions that students have, I'd love to hear your perspective on this. Good, so Sandra entered in the comments. She said, I think what to do if the UX designers do not have enough support from stakeholders or upper management. What strategies can empower them? Yeah, I hear that more often than I would have expected. It's like you have to be a champion for UX. And I think the folks that I've talked to that are happiest are the ones who have convinced upper management that UX is vitally important. I think, Sandra, is that kind of what you're getting at? Because the last part of your comment is what strategies can empower them, and I'm not sure that I know the answer to that, but I don't know what strategies work best, but the conversation that I've had indicate that it is definitely a worthwhile endeavor to get upper management on your side and to value UX. And I think the best way to do that is to actually involve them and to sort of demonstrate to them the product was like this until we applied UX principles, and now it's like this, and it's so much better. Okay, so let's move on to the next section, which is experiential learning. Because what I've shared with you so far, these are activities that happened in and out of the classroom, and the ones out of the classroom are considered experiential learning. But what I found was that that's where the students really connected, and that's really where the great learning happened. In a way, teaching this class and developing this curriculum has transformed the way that I teach. It's much less about lecture and theory and much more about doing the work and learning from doing. So while we look at these next slides, I think this might be the last chat question, and I can drop it in the chat too. But it's, in your opinion, what are the most effective ways for universities to incorporate real-world projects and experiences into the UX curriculum? So while you think of ways that you think universities might incorporate real-world projects, I'll share some examples of things that emerged at our universities. Okay, so the first story is about a company called Twine.it. So if you see in this picture, you can see that it's a big tower that they set up at weddings. You've seen photo booths at weddings, I'm assuming. This is similar to a photo booth, except it creates a social network just for the event, and then the social network dissolves after the event. So you download the app, and everybody at the event, they're friends with each other by default. Every photo that you take gets shared with everybody that you take from the app. And then there's also a photo booth kind of built into this tower. And so this is good because you don't have to be friends with all the people at the event, and you don't have to use hashtags and stuff. It just all sort of happens. So kind of an interesting concept. They're local to Toledo, and they're a growing business. But I talked to the president of the company, and I told him that we could use my class to do like a usability analysis of it. And he said, that's great. I actually have one installed at a bar in Bowling Green, which is where our campus is. So you wouldn't know it from this picture because it looks kind of dark, but that's a bar, but it's at 3 p.m, which is during our class time. So the bar manager agreed to open up and let us do a simulation. And so he turned the music on, he turned the lights on, and the students got to sort of pretend like they were in this bar at night and got to use this photo app. And so, you can see, like in this picture, some of them are taking notes, some of them are using the interface. I asked them to take notes, and then we did a reflection afterwards. But I really wanted them to do a simulation of how it felt to use this. Use this device in its intended setting. And they loved it. They totally got into it, as you can see in the picture. They really loved that. The rule was they could order 2 drinks if they were of age, but not more than that. It was 3 p.m. So if anybody knows anybody who's an administrator at the university, don't tell them I did this. So what we noticed is this class got to be pretty popular, and we were doing things like, this is a collaboration with students in the fashion design program. And this isn't exactly UX, but we wanted to try doing like a design hack where we gave all of the participants some just kind of random material that we could buy at the dollar store. And the fashion design students and the UX students worked together to create these garments, just with that. So like I said, not exactly UX, but it's definitely creative ideation. And sort of at the same time we were building up the curriculum, we were also building out a lab that was you could sort of consider a maker space and an innovation lab. And so we had access to things like 3D printers. And so students could prototype things, not just using Figma, but physical objects. This is like a USB stick holder. So we had 3D printers, we had a laser cutter, and so they could make physical objects out of cardboard and out of wood, which was very cool. And we would open up events in the lab. We would open them up to anybody on campus. And so we saw, pretty decent participation. We held an event called Essential Skills for a Career in UX, where we had several people from Toledo who worked on UX teams. We had an innovator panel. We had guest speakers. Creative ideation workshop. We had a hack where the hack was to turn things that ended up in the trash into something useful. So really cool stuff like that. And it was just really great to see folks on campus coming together and seeing UX sort of being embraced on campus. And so the administrators started to, coming back to the question that Sandra posed, administrators were sort of valuing UX and saying, wow, this could actually be used in different contexts too, and in different classes. Like UX isn't just in the realm of web design or graphic design where it normally lives. It's also in the realm of business. It's also in the realm of engineering. So that was a really cool shift. I see some chats messages, so I'm going to take advantage while they're here. So Miles, thank you, Miles, by the way, for being so engaged. Going right off of learning from doing, I think the maximally effective way is to truly make it real. Company or community partners with a real problem. Yes, I totally agree. Right, so I did this sort of simulation thing, but make it real, like make it an actual collaboration with a company. Or if a real problem isn't feasible, offering a highly realistic stakeholder perspectives and design scenarios. I totally agree. Because the thing is, you can't invent all of the constraints that happen in a real world scenario. Like they only really happen in real life. And then Sandra says, internship programs or contact projects with companies / organizations similar to postgrad research programs. Yes. Yes. And I think the interesting thing here is it doesn't have to be an internship doing like on a UX team. It could be an internship doing UX for a company that doesn't have a UX team. Okay, and I'll show you some examples that are kind of similar to that didn't necessarily happen with community partners as much as it did on campus. So this is Eliza on the left and Tori on the right. They worked together to redesign, I don't know if you all remember when you were in college, something called a degree audit. So it told you like sort of how far along your degree you were. They are notoriously terrible. I've worked at 3 different universities, and the degree audit is terrible at each one. So this is some human-centered design right here. They heard so many people complaining about the degree audit report that they decided to redesign it. So they did an independent study project, did user testing with the degree audit, made a prototype of a redesign, and then tested the redesign and did a statistical comparison between the two. And this actually affected some change because we actually, the university adopted some of the suggestions that they made for that. So that was really cool to see that change happening on campus. Hattie here worked on an app that augmented the university tour experience. You know, like when people are potential students and they come to visit campus. She worked on an app that used GPS to prompt notifications as people traveled around. Chloe learned about how impactful and substantial food insecurity was on campus. And so she conducted user testing with students to learn about the level of food insecurity, and actually started a print campaign to raise awareness about food insecurity on campus. And that led to a mobile pantry that actually helped to try to address the problem. So Miles says, loved it back when I was a student, and I hope you're not talking about your degree audit. I'm sure you didn't love the degree audit. It says, loved it back when I was a student and love it now from my perspective of thinking through how and where my org can develop those partnerships in education, both to give back to the field and potentially to improve our junior hiring pipelines. Absolutely. You know, if you reach out to any local university and say, like, who's teaching UX? Because it might be in graphic design, it might be in visual communication, it might be in marketing, actually, or it might actually be in computer science, or sometimes it's its own department. But reach out and say, there are these opportunities, and now I think it's a win-win. Like you said, Miles, you can pick and choose these quality students to add to your pipeline, and they can learn from real-world examples. Okay, I'm going to talk through just a couple more student examples, and these were things that are extra outside of class. So these are independent studies. I worked on an app called Sing and Sketch, where you draw and the pitch of your voice changes the color of the stroke. A student named Trey worked on the UX of it, and that was his independent study project. I also helped this student with our sign language translation software. He integrated it into a learning tool for a center for people with developmental disabilities. And so that's what this app is. And similarly, Rebecca made a almost like a Duolingo for sign language by leveraging the same technology that I've been working on. Okay, so finally, I'm going to wrap things up by talking about a way that, as I said, I'm a computer scientist, and I studied HCI. They didn't even call it UX back when I was a student. But I've always embraced UX and as a very important aspect of any software project. And I realized after really immersing myself in UX to do this curriculum development, I realized that I could apply it to my teaching, and I could help other people be better teachers by applying UX principles to teaching. And so I worked with another teacher who's also into UX to develop these faculty workshops. And we've held these workshops with faculty members from different universities, a professional teaching organization, and a couple of high school districts. And it's basically, it's called Learner Experience Design. And it's basically, this is going to look very familiar to you. You interview students. So you do human-centered design with students. You take your insights and you build out teaching tools and teaching methods based on your insights. And then you evaluate and refine them. So this format, we've taught it, like I said, to different folks. And what we found is that, they do basically the same UX exercises that the students in the UX class do, but they're doing it so that they can be better teachers. And what we found, because we've conducted studies on this with pre and post surveys, is that doing UX with students, they feel closer to students and they feel more motivated to teach. And it's resulted in a lot of enhanced conversations among faculty members because they're really thinking about this from the student's perspective, which is pretty amazing. Okay, so that brings us to the end of the slides. So I want to say thank you to everyone who's attended, and I think we've got a couple of minutes. If you have any questions for me, of course, I've asked you a bunch of questions. If you have any questions for me, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thanks so much for that, Jerry. It was very interesting how the programs are incorporated and the examples that you gave.
Thank you.
Those were great to see. Thank you for sharing those. Yeah, we can give a minute or two for any last minute questions or comments.
I know it's end of the day, and it's doing a virtual conference. I know it's hard to sort of stay engaged. So,
good thing there are recordings.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people.
Well, and hopefully with the recordings, you'll see my email address. This goes out to anyone who's watching the recording. Feel free to reach out. I love talking about UX. I love talking about education. And if there's any feedback you can give me on this talk, or if there's any questions you have for me, please reach out.
That's great, Jerry. Thank you for putting that out there.
Yep.
Okay. Looks like we're good with questions or comments. I think it's probably a good point to call it a day and just reflect on all the activities of the day and get ready for tomorrow. So thank you, everybody, for attending. And thank you, Miles, for the comments that you put in the answers to the questions. Thank you, Jerry, for the interactive presentation. It was great to see, as you said, for a few times, the presenters asking the audience questions instead of the other way around. So it's a good way to keep everybody engaged. Thank you for doing that. And we wish everybody good luck and enjoy the rest of the conference tomorrow.
Great. Thanks, everybody. And thanks, Sandra.
Thank you, Jerry. See you later.
Bye-bye.
Bye.